Hey everyone, welcome back to Inside Gaming. Today we're reviewing Catherine Full Body. This is a weird one. It's part dating sim, part psychological evaluation quiz, part quirky puzzle game, part make your girlfriend break up with you if you happen to be in the same room while you're playing. Catherine is back, baby. It's the C or the K or the new lady who is no weird iteration on Catherine, which to me kind of makes this a 0 out of 10, but we got Caden over here who played the game to actually tell us an actual score, not based on my biases about naming conventions. Hey, Caden.
Okay, so yeah, the naming thing is weird. It's all over the place, but we'll get to that. If you played the original Catherine, there's not too much new here, which that's not necessarily a bad thing. Catherine, was a really fun game, and re-releasing it, that seems to be the mantra of the generation. If it was good then, it'll be good now. So why not?
Yeah, and I played the original. I haven't played Full Body, so that's kind of where we're coming from. Caden's the expert on Full Body. And I played a lot of the original and really, really like it, so I'm really excited about the re-release. I think it's mostly just going to break down to what's been added for me, but for you, if you're unfamiliar with the game, it breaks down into sections, which oddly, if you played or heard about Persona, there are some similarities there, namely in that you have, huge chunks of the games that are basically independent games, but they overlap a lot in their effects on each other. So all the sections of the game, basically you have a character interaction portion, which is kind of like life simulator, maybe visual novel style. You have a puzzle platforming section where you have to climb up a stage and push blocks around to make a path before a giant monster eats you or you fall to your death. And then quiz sections where you answer seemingly innocuous questions about relationships and how complicated they can be. But all these various sections of the game interact with each other, right? They're not just distinct gameplay chunks.
Yeah, actually everything affects each other in a pretty significant way. If you don't end up talking to certain people at a certain time, they may end up dying in this nightmare realm. And, you meet characters in this nightmare version of reality, and then you see them in the real world, and your actions in there either dictate life, death. And that's pretty much the end of it. Is the better endings is everybody lives, and the bad endings is everybody dies. But there's subtle nuances in there.
So that's interesting because the endings of the original game weren't quite so cut and dry. It was a little more, shouldn't spoil that, but you got me interested. So the quiz sections of the game, and this is when you're doing if it's still like it was in the original Catherine, you do puzzle sections, you finish a stage, and then you go into an elevator, and you pull one of two ropes, basically to answer a question one of two ways. It's kind of like a Facebook quiz, but a lot more interesting. How does that play out? Is that kind of the way it was and where it used to be, where they would ask you an interesting relationship question that was a little complicated and see where you fell on it?
So yes and no. It's very obvious when they haven't changed it, and also extremely obvious, and they point it out with a big giant finger. It's like, this is the different thing. Please pay attention to this. So you have the negative questions and the positive questions. So it's like you can side with one or the other, but then there's this third option in these weird questions where they'll throw you a wild card, and either the meter of morality will either stay together or shatter.
Okay, interesting. So and I keep referencing this, but in the original Catherine, you would have one of two options that loosely correlated philosophically with the narrative that our protagonist Vincent was undergoing, essentially that he was dating his girlfriend named Catherine and then was seduced by another lady also named Catherine but with a K. Or was it? No, I think it was inverted. I think his girlfriend was K and...
His girlfriend was K, and then the new girl was C, which it's going to get more complicated from here.
So that's what I wanted to ask. Not to ruin the original, even though it is pretty old at this point, but by the end of it, there were basically philosophical underpinnings around both of those women that Vincent was being tempted by. So does this third lady, this new addition to Full Body, does she represent some kind of new philosophy? And is that also represented in these questions? Is that how it works?
Absolutely 100% correct. That is exactly what this does. It offers another option, which, to be fair, there were 3 options in the first game, so this would be technically a 4th.
Okay, I guess that's true. Yeah. So that's kind of like a side attraction, and it is kind of interesting to be posed those interesting questions. The meat of the game, though, is this puzzle platforming, which is shockingly difficult. You can basically push and pull blocks to reach the goal at the top of a tower, and as you progress, the block variety increases, and this makes the mechanics of the puzzling actually difficult, because you have to pull and push blocks around to basically make a staircase for you to get up. You got bomb blocks, ice blocks, random blocks, monster blocks, heavy blocks, immovable blocks, spring blocks, all kinds of mechanics combined to make you like really Basically, you have to think like 4 or 5 steps ahead like any good puzzle game. And I assume that aspect is still there, right? Because the original game was hyper challenging, but in a really cool way.
So yeah, that's all still there. They added a bunch of new levels and they added some additional content to it. But that part of the game, that actual meat, the puzzle section of the game, is pretty much untouched, other than adding some new, puzzle elements to it and adding new puzzles to actually play that are adjacent to story mode but don't actually impact it whatsoever.
Oh, okay, because I remember in the original, again, keep referencing that, there was that Rapunzel side game, like the arcade game that you could play that was essentially just a whole chunk of extra stages. Is that kind of the idea here?
That's still there, but there's actually more to it. There's a remix mode that adds in new mechanics and lets you link blocks together like Tetrominoes, which is actually really cool. But it's kind of like completely revamped to be a subtly different game. It's not a huge change, but it's enough to make it feel fresh.
Okay. So just on the puzzling alone, do you think this is a good recommendation for people that like puzzle games? It's not like there are tons of them out, really. It's mostly just a ton of Picross and Sudoku, and now this.
This is a really fun puzzle game. It doubles the amount of content from the first game, so we're totaling about 500 different stages and puzzles to use. So it's pretty lengthy. It's a girthy game for people who like puzzle games.
Amen. So Full Body adds just tons more puzzles, and you mentioned that it maybe adds new mechanics. What are some of those?
There's a bunch of different things that they add. So it's like if you're not necessarily good at puzzle games, it'll make it easier. You can have a safety mode on. There's, again, that aforementioned, remix mode, which adds in some of those like Tetromino pieces and allows you to link blocks together. And some of the new stages are just really challenging. They get long and they get difficult. And unless you're incredibly knowledgeable about every single block and every single piece, you're going to end up messing up. They definitely leaned a little bit too heavy on the item usage in some of these stages. And unless you use them in quite the right way, it's just too damn difficult. But that's kind of the fun of this anyway.
Is it one of those you're dead and you don't even know it kind of things, where you made a mistake 6 turns back, but you don't know that until way later, and is it always easy to tell where you made a mistake, or can it get very difficult to suss that out in some of these puzzles?
In the later stages, it can definitely be really difficult to figure out where you made a mistake, but thankfully there are checkpoints, so you can always restart there. Or if you really think you messed up, you can always restart the entire stage back at the beginning and see where you might have gone wrong. I did that quite a bit during the later stages, but in those earlier stages, it really is just trying to teach you those fundamentals, and it does a really good job of it. So again, if you're not necessarily good at the game, there's an easier mode called safety mode, which has no game overs, no time limits, the ability to have a computer autoplay levels for you, which, I guess it defeats the purpose, but if you really like story, it's there for you. But if you don't want to dumb down the difficulty a little bit, there's also this new Catherine called Rin, and she actually plays the piano when you're in danger, and it slows the block's descent. So it makes the game a little bit easier in the story mode. It's not a big change. It's a nice quality of life upgrade, but it also adds a story element to it, so it all makes sense in the end.
I just got it. Rin, because that's the last part of Catherine.
There you go. You got it.
Damn it. I guess, yeah, there's like QU is the only other kind of sound, whatever. So one of the fascinating things for me is that Catherine actually got some traction in competitive scenes. I remember there were Catherine tournaments that were breaking out at fighting game tournaments and stuff like that, because playing the game competitively is actually really cool. Basically, 2 people are going up separate towers side by side, and you can kind of affect the other person and mess with them a little bit based on how you play. Has that been revamped at all in this game?
Yeah, they're a little bit more robust. Coliseum and the Babel modes now can be played online, and they're available right at the start, so you don't have to go about unlocking them. There's also a battle mode, online leaderboards, and you can even play co-op with a friend.
Oh boy.
There's also this really weird thing that it's kind of like Dark Souls when you're playing online. So, you can see these little wisps of things. It's like that somebody died right there, but it doesn't really matter.
So I could see value to that, both in, like you mentioned, the AI playing a stage for you or seeing the ghosts of other players, because it might spark an idea of how to move blocks around. I don't know if it actually works that way, but a large part of the original Catherine was noting certain setups of blocks and knowing exactly how to move them quickly, so you didn't spend a lot of time really puzzling out how to move these blocks around. Like, it was like the tornado and the stair step and all these techniques that you could learn. So is that kind of the idea, that seeing shadows of other players and seeing AI play for you will teach you some of those things, or does it really not work that way?
It doesn't really work that way. It's just, here's a little wisp that's on a block. Somebody died there. You really can't tell why. You just know that there's something dangerous there. You can, however, take those techniques that you learn and actually finally be able to rewatch them, which you weren't able to do after you've seen them. So you just had to commit them to memory. But when you're on those little platforms doing those little quiz sections, you can revisit those things and be like, oh, hey, I forgot how to do this. Let me watch this again.
Okay, all right. Well, that covers kind of the nuts and bolts of the game, which, you know, is an important part of it. But to me, at least, the grand thing about Catherine is how so much of it ties back into its own themes. And now we get to talk about story, because Catherine tackles a really interesting subject matter with varying levels of success, I think, but at least it's out there trying. So the story of the game mostly plays out in conversations you have with other characters, both in and out of this nightmare dimension where you have to constantly be running away from something. Again, ties into the themes of the game. And it has a variety of in-game anime-style cutscenes, because anime is the superlative kind of art that humanity has invented. So when it comes to the story, what's been added? Obviously there's a new character, which I guess muddies up the whole nature of the story, which is that Vincent's trying to decide which Catherine he wants to end up with. But how does Rin factor into that? Is it just, hey, here's another girl that showed up at the bar throwing herself at him? I don't know, how does that all shake out? Does it make it better, or does it just make it more crowded?
It actually feels pretty natural the way this Rin character is worked in. She's actually Catherine with a Q, but they call her Rin because calling her Quathrin is just stupid.
It is QU.
It is.
Blah! I thought it. Okay. All right.
It is QATHERINE.
You did it, Atlas. The Madmen. They went and did it.
It really works, and this Rin character doesn't really force themselves on Vincent in any way, shape, or form. You actually really have to go out of your way to get any kind of like connection with Rin. So while Catherine with a K is throwing herself at you, and Catherine with a C is throwing herself at you, and you're, as Vincent, struggling to find your own self, Rin is there as this constant. It's just like, I'm here to support you. So it's a very different dynamic between all four of these characters.
Oh, that's interesting. You're telling me that there's an anime where there are females who are not sex objects? That doesn't sound right to me at all.
In an Atlas game? How dare they?
Weird. If you're on the board, I can date you. And if I pick the right thing enough times in a row, I'll get to sleep with you in a very tasteful cutaway sequence. It doesn't happen here, which is kind of nice. You even have a note here that, or you noted that Catherine exists within the Persona universe? I actually didn't know that.
Yeah, so Vincent actually appeared before this game ever came out in the Persona 3 portable game. He's actually drinking at a bar, and you go in there and he's just saying there, he's like, I'm having really bad nightmares. So he existed before Catherine, and he's popped up as like DLC costumes in a couple other things, notably Persona 5. And vice versa, Joker appears in this game as DLC as well.
Okay, so obviously without spoiling anything, you play through the game, you make your decisions. Based on the decisions, the game kind of reads your philosophical nature when it comes to relationships and how you think about them, or if you tell you can steer the game in a particular way based on the dialogue options you pick. Does it still have that thing where you're texting from inside the bathroom? Because that was one of my favorite parts.
Yes, you get a lot of texts and you get a lot of phone calls, and that is throughout the entirety of the game. And doing those actually helps impact the endings as well.
Yeah, so the game basically, and one of the cooler things is in games like this, sometimes it can be hard to tell what's having an effect and what isn't. They show you a literal meter showing up every time you make a decision that affects anything, so you know where the decision points are. And all of this drives towards an ending that theoretically represents the decisions that you would have made about complicated relationships and things like that. Having said that, how do you feel about the endings in this game? Because the original one, again, trying to avoid spoilers, it was a little Twilight Zone-y, kind of like Black Mirror-ish, where the ending was the ending, and it wasn't necessarily, like, it got a little supernatural at times and wasn't quite really rooted in actual human drama. So I'm curious where this goes. Does it just go off the deep end at some point and the host is just like, well, that's just how it goes? Or is it actually a little more well tied together?
So for the Rin endings, it actually kind of ties itself pretty neatly together by answering some questions that we really didn't get answered or really ask in the first game because we didn't get enough information. But the original endings are all still there, with 2 new additional endings for Catherine with a C and Catherine with a K, and then 3 big endings for Rin as well. So that's 13 endings, and playing them all and getting all of them actually gives you a much better picture than the original Catherine did.
Well, but is it worth it to play through it that many times? Because the story mission, or the story levels, the actual puzzle levels stay the same, right?
Yes, they do, but and this is where things come into that difficulty. You can always start on those easier modes and then ramp up the difficulty as you continue to play through those endings, and you can build up that skill level, and then you can just bring it online.
That's a really good point. Okay, so the reviews of re-releases are always kind of weird because I feel like we have to speak to people who have never played Catherine before and people who have played that and want to know if this is enough of a revamp or adds enough content to make it worth playing again. For me, honestly, I just wanted an excuse to play Catherine again. So I'm in no matter what. I don't know if that's the boat you're in, but Caden, where would you fall in terms of talking to those two audiences?
If you've played Catherine before and you felt, well, this was fun and that's enough, then you really don't need to play Catherine Full Body, especially because it is a $60 retail game, which I think might be a little bit too much for a re-release, especially considering the fact that they just ported the original Catherine as Catherine Classic to PC for $20. So that $40 disparity is pretty big. And the PC port of Catherine actually had a significant upgrade. There was 4K and all this lovely bells and whistles added. So this is just like Catherine Plus, but it really doesn't add anything other than story. So if you just want to play the puzzle games, Catherine Classic on PC is just fine. If you want more story, then Catherine Full Body is where it's at.
Okay, what about somebody who's never played Catherine before but was maybe interested in it? For them, would you still recommend the $20 Catherine Classic or just go Full Body, get the whole experience?
If you're into these kind of games, if you really like anime games, if you really like puzzle games, then go for Full Body. It's a perfect experience and it kind of encapsulates everything. And it is worth it if it's your first version of Catherine, because all the upgrades that it has for online and the story modes, it's worth the $60 price tag if you haven't played it before.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sold. Hopefully that gave you all the information you need. Any closing thoughts, Caden?
There's too much DLC for this damn game.
What is it? Just costumes and stuff?
It's a bunch of costumes, the Japanese voice cast, and some extra little things in there, and plus some glasses that lets you see the underwear and bathing suits of other characters.
God bless you, Japan. It is the killer. Do not die. Please stay alive until next Inside Gaming, and if you have nightmares, maybe you got a dirty conscience you got to clear. That'll be it for us today. Thank you, Caden, and thank you for being faithful to your lover. We'll catch you next time on Inside Gaming. Bye, everybody. And we don't want to get monetized, so it's Titty Tuesday!
Goodbye, money. We'll miss you. Actually, it's been a while since we had a Steam controversy, especially one involving the Bristol area. It's been, what, a few weeks now?
Sorry, Borderlands 3 reviews. Turns out people don't like watching YouTube videos where you just run down a bunch of numbers, so we're going to talk about titties instead.
I like this. Yeah, so Valve once again finds